enjoy the next part of Monte Cristo. Thank you.
The insult. As they were leaving the banker's, Beauchamp stopped Morcerf. "Listen," he warned. "Just now I said while we were at Monsieur Danglars that the person you should ask for an explanation was Monsieur de Monte Cristo." "Yes, and we are going to see him." "One moment, Morcerf. Think before you go to the Count's." "What do you want me to think about?" "The seriousness of this step." "Is it more serious than going to see Monsieur Danglars?" "Yes. Monsieur Danglars was a man of money, and, as you know, men of money have too precise an idea of the capital they are risking to fight easily. The other, on the contrary, is a gentleman, at least in appearance. Are you not afraid of discovering the bravo beneath the gentleman?" "I am afraid of only one thing, which is to discover a man who will not fight." "Have no fear," said Beauchamp. "This one will fight. I am even afraid of something, namely that he will fight too well. Take care." "My friend," Morcerf said with a fine smile, "that's all I ask, and the best that could happen to me is to be killed for my father. That would save all of us." "Your mother would die of grief." "Yes, my poor mother," said Albert, putting a hand to his eyes. "I know, but it is better for her to die of grief than of shame." "So you have really made up your mind, Albert?" "Yes." "Come on, then. But do you think we will find him?" "He was due to return a few hours after me, and will certainly have done so." They got into the cab and ordered the driver to take them to number 30, Avenue des Champs-Élysées. Beauchamp wanted to go in alone, but Albert pointed out to him that this affair was so unusual that it allowed them to ignore the usual dueling etiquette. The young man was acting in this case in such a sacred cause that Beauchamp could do nothing except bow to his will, so he did as Morcerf said and agreed to follow him. Albert covered the distance between the concierge's lodge and the front steps in a single bound. Baptistin came to greet him. The Count had indeed returned, but he was in the bath and had forbidden him to admit anyone at all. "And after the bath?" Morcerf asked. "Monsieur will take dinner." "And after dinner?" "Monsieur will sleep for an hour." "And then?" "And then he will go to the opera." "Are you sure of that?" Albert asked. "Absolutely sure. Monsieur ordered his horses for 8 o'clock precisely." "Very well," said Albert. "That is all I wanted to know." Then, turning to Beauchamp, he added, "If you have anything to do, Beauchamp, do it at once. If you have any appointment for this evening, postpone it until tomorrow. You realize that I am counting on you to come to the opera. If you can, bring Chateau Renard with you." Beauchamp took advantage of the leave he was granted and left Albert, promising to collect him at 7:45. As soon as he got rid of him, Albert informed Franz, Debray, and Morel of his wish to see them that evening at the opera. Then he went to see his mother, who, since the events of the previous day, had barred her door to visitors and remained in her room. He found her in bed, overwhelmed by this public humiliation. The sight of Albert produced the effect one might imagine on Mercedes. She clasped her son's hand and burst into tears, but the tears relieved her. Albert remained standing silently for a moment beside his mother. From his pale face and furrowed brow, one can see that the edge was gradually wearing off the thirst for vengeance in his heart. "Mother," he asked, "do you know of any enemies of Monsieur de Morcerf's?" Mercedes shuddered. She noticed that the young man did not say "of my father's." "My dear," she said, "people of the Count's standing have many enemies whom they do not even know. In any case, the enemies whom one does know are clearly not the most dangerous." "Yes, I know that. So I am appealing to all your perspicacity. Mother, you are a woman of such superior intellect that nothing escapes you. Why do you say that? Because you will have noticed, for example, that on the evening of our ball, Monsieur de Monte Cristo did not want to take any refreshment in our house. Mercedes raised herself on one arm, trembling with fever. Monsieur de Monte Cristo, she exclaimed. What has he to do with your question to me? You know, Mother, Monsieur de Monte Cristo is almost a man of the East and an Oriental. In order not to interfere with his freedom to take revenge, he never eats or drinks in his enemy's house. What are you saying, Albert? Mercedes asked, turning whiter than the sheet that covered her. Monsieur de Monte Cristo, one of our enemies? Whoever told you such a thing? Why? You are mad, Albert. Monsieur de Monte Cristo has shown nothing but courtesy towards us. He saved your life, and you yourself introduced him to us. Oh, please, my son, if you have any such ideas, discard them. And if I have anything to say to you, even more, if I have any prayer to make to you, it is that you should remain in good standing with him. Mother, the young man said, glowering, you have your own reasons for telling me to remain on good terms with this man. I? Mercedes cried, blushing as rapidly as she had previously gone pale, then almost immediately turning even whiter than before. Yes, certainly, and the reason must surely be that he can only do us harm. Mercedes shuddered, and looking inquiringly at her son, said, You are speaking strangely, and it seems to me that you have some odd prejudices. What has the Count done to you? 3 days ago you were with him in Normandy. 3 days ago I considered him, as you also did, your best friend. An ironic smile flickered across Albert's lips. Mercedes saw it, and with the combined instincts of a wife and a mother, she guessed everything. But, strong and prudent, she hid her anxiety. Albert fell silent, and a moment later the Countess resumed the conversation. You came to ask me how I was, she said, and I will tell you frankly, my dear, that I am not feeling well. You should stay here, Albert, and keep me company. I have a need not to be alone. Mother, the young man replied, I should obey you, and you know how happily, if urgent and important business did not oblige me to leave you for the whole evening. Very well, Albert, she replied, sighing. I should not like to make you a slave to your filial duty. Albert pretended not to have heard, kissed his mother, and left. Hardly had he closed the door, however, than Mercedes called a trusted servant and ordered him to follow Albert wherever he went, and to report back to her immediately. Then she rang for her chambermaid, and, weak as she felt, had herself dressed to be prepared for any eventuality. The task she had given the servant was not hard to carry out. Albert returned home and got dressed, in clothes that were somehow stylish but not ostentatious. At 7:50 Beauchamp arrived. He had seen Chateau Renard, who had promised to be in the stalls before the curtain went up. Both got into Albert's coupé, and he, having no reason to hide where he was going, said aloud, "To the opera!" In his impatience, he arrived before the curtain went up. Chateau Renard was in his seat, and as he had been told everything by Beauchamp, Albert had no need to explain anything to him. The idea of a son seeking revenge for his father was so natural that Chateau Renard made no attempt to dissuade him, but merely repeated his assurance that he was at Albert's disposal. Debray had not yet arrived, but Albert knew that he rarely missed a performance at the opera. Albert wandered around the theatre, waiting for the curtain to rise. He did hope to meet Monte Cristo, either in the corridor or on the staircase. The bell called him to his seat, and he went to sit in the stalls between Chateau Renard and Beauchamp, but his eyes remained fixed on the side box, which remained obstinately closed throughout the first act. Finally, at the start of the second act, as Albert was looking at his watch for the 100th time, the door of the box opened, and Monte Cristo, dressed in black, came in and leant on the rail while he looked around the auditorium. Morel followed him, searching for his sister and brother-in-law. He saw them in a box on the second level and waved. As the Count was running his eyes over the audience, he noticed a pale head and shining gaze that seemed eager to draw his attention, and he did indeed recognize Albert. But the expression he saw on that devastated face must have warned him to give no sign that he had seen him. Without any indication of what he was thinking, he sat down, took his glasses out of their case, and turned them in another direction. However, even though he appeared not to see Albert, the Count did not lose sight of him, and when the curtain fell at the end of the second act, his eagle eyes followed the young man as he left the stalls with his two friends. Then he saw the same head appear in a box on the balcony, opposite his own. He anticipated the approaching storm, and when he heard the key turn in the door of his box, even though he was at that moment speaking to Morel with his most cheerful expression, he knew what to expect and was ready for it. The door opened. Only then did Monte Cristo turn around and see Albert, white and trembling. Behind him were Beauchamp and Château-Renard. "Well now," he exclaimed, with the benevolent courtesy that usually distinguished his greeting from the banal politeness of social convention, "here is my horseman at the end of his ride. Good evening, Monsieur de Morcerf." And the man, so utterly in command of himself, wore an expression of the utmost cordiality. Only now did Morel remember the letter that the Viscount had sent to him, in which the latter, with no further explanation, had asked him to come to the opera, and he realized that something dreadful was about to take place. "We have not come to exchange hypocritical courtesies or pretensions of friendship," the young man said. "We have come to ask you for an explanation, Monsieur le Comte." His trembling voice was loath to emerge from between his clenched teeth. "Explanation? At the opera?" said the Count with his calm voice and penetrating gaze, two signs that infallibly indicate a man who is utterly sure of himself. "Unfamiliar though I am with Parisian manners, I should not have thought, monsieur, that this is where one would go to explain oneself." "Yet, when someone hides away," Albert retorted, "when one cannot reach him on the grounds that he is in the bath, at table, or in bed, one must repair to wherever he can be met." "I am not hard to find, monsieur," said Monte Cristo. "Only yesterday, unless my memory deceives me, you were staying in my house." "Yesterday, monsieur," said the young man, whose head was starting to spin, "I was in your house because I did not know who you were." As he spoke these words, Albert raised his voice so that he could be heard by the people in the neighbouring boxes and those passing along the corridor. At the sound of the argument, the people in the boxes turned around, and those passing in the corridor stopped behind Beauchamp and Château-Renard. "Where have you come from, monsieur?" Monte Cristo said, without giving the slightest appearance of any emotion. "You do not appear to be in your right mind." "I shall always be sensible enough," Albert said furiously, "if I can understand your perfidy and manage to make you understand that I want revenge for it." "I don't understand a word of what you are saying," Monte Cristo retorted. "Even if I did, you would still be saying it too loudly. I am at home here, monsieur, and only I have the right to raise my voice above the rest. So kindly leave." And he showed him the door with a splendidly imperative gesture. "Oh, I'll get you out of your home, all right," said Albert, convulsively twisting a glove in his hands, while Monte Cristo kept his eyes firmly fixed on it. Very well," he said resignedly. "You want an argument with me, monsieur, I can see that. But let me just give you one word of advice, Viscount, and don't forget it. It is a bad habit to shout it from the rooftops when one challenges a person. Not everyone benefits from attracting attention, Monsieur de Morcerf. At the name, a murmur of astonishment passed like a shiver among all those who had been observing the scene. Since the previous day, the name of Morcerf had been on everyone's lips. Albert understood the implication of the quip sooner and better than anyone, and made to throw his glove in the Count's face, but Morel grasped his wrist, while Beauchamp and Château-Renard, fearing that the incident might develop into something more than a challenge, restrained him from behind. Monte Cristo, without getting up, tipped his chair back and reached out to snatch the damp, crumpled glove from the young man's hand. "Monsieur," he said in a terrifying voice, "I will consider your gauntlet thrown down and send it back wrapped around a bullet. Now leave me, or I shall call my servants to throw you out." Intoxicated, horrified, wild-eyed, Albert took 2 steps back, and Morel seized the opportunity to shut the door. Monte Cristo took up his lorgnette and went back to his survey of the theatre, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. The man had a heart of bronze and a face of marble. Morel leant over and whispered, "What did you do to him?" "I? Nothing. At least nothing personal," the Count replied. "But there must be some reason for this peculiar incident." "The young man is enraged by the Comte de Morcerf's misfortune." "Did you have anything to do with that?" "Haydée was the one who told the house of his father's treachery." "Indeed," said Morel. "I was told, though I couldn't believe it, that the Greek slave I saw you with in this very box was the daughter of Ali Pasha." "It's absolutely true." "Good heavens! Now I understand everything. The incident was premeditated." "How is that?" "Yes, Albert wrote to me to come to the opera this evening. He wanted me to witness his insult to you." "Probably," said Monte Cristo with his imperturbable calm. "But what will you do with him?" "With whom?" "Albert." "With Albert?" Monte Cristo replied in the same voice. "What will I do with him, Maximilien? Why, as surely as you are here and I am shaking your hand, I shall kill him tomorrow before 10 in the morning. That's what I'll do with him." Morel took Monte Cristo's hand in both of his and shuddered to feel how cold and steady it was. "Oh, Count," he said, "his father loves him so much." "Don't tell me that," said Monte Cristo with the first sign of anger that he had allowed himself to show. "I would make him suffer." Morel dropped the Count's hand in amazement. "Count!" he exclaimed. "Oh, my dear Maximilien," the Count interrupted, "listen to how admirably Dupré sings that phrase, 'O Mathilde, idole de mon âme.' Now, I was the first to spot Dupré in Naples, and the first to applaud him. Bravo! Bravo!" Morel understood that there was no more to be said, and he waited. The curtain, which had risen at the end of the incident with Albert, fell shortly after. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," said Monte Cristo, his voice not betraying any emotion. Beauchamp appeared. "Good evening, Monsieur Beauchamp," said Monte Cristo, as if meeting the journalist for the first time that evening. "Do sit down." Beauchamp bowed, came in, and sat down. "Monsieur," he said to Monte Cristo, "a short time ago, as you will have observed, I accompanied Monsieur de Morcerf." "That probably means," Monte Cristo said with a laugh, "that you had just had dinner together. I am happy to see that you are more sober than he was, Monsieur Beauchamp." I admit, monsieur, that Albert was wrong to lose his temper, and I have come on my own account to make my excuses to you. But now that my excuses have been made, and mine only, you understand, Count, I have come to tell you that I consider you too honourable a man to refuse to give me some explanation of your relations with the people in Janina, and I shall add a few words about that young Greek woman." With a gesture of the lips and eyes, Monte Cristo ordered silence. "Well now," he said with a laugh, "all my expectations are disappointed." "What do you mean?" Beauchamp asked. "No doubt you were in a hurry to give me a reputation for eccentricity. According to you, I am a Lara, a Manfred, a Lord Ruthven. Then, once the time for seeing me as an eccentric has gone, the image is spoiled, and you try to turn me into an ordinary man. You want me to be commonplace and vulgar. You even ask me for explanations. Come, come, Monsieur Beauchamp, you are joking." "And yet," Beauchamp replied haughtily, "there are some occasions when honesty commands us—" "What commands the Count of Monte Cristo," the strange man interrupted, "is the Count of Monte Cristo. So not a word of all this, I beg you. I do what I wish, Monsieur Beauchamp, and believe me, it is always very well done." "Sir," said the young man, "an honourable person cannot be paid in such coin. One must have guarantees of honour." "I am a living guarantee," said Monte Cristo imperturbably, but with a threatening light in his eyes. "We both have blood in our veins which we wish to spill. There is our mutual guarantee. Take that reply back to the Viscount, and tell him that tomorrow, before 10 o'clock, I shall have seen the colour of his." "So there is nothing left for me but to make arrangements for the duel?" "All that is a matter of perfect indifference to me, monsieur," said the Count. "There was no need to come and interrupt the performance for such a slight thing. In France, one fights with a sword or pistol. In the colonies, they take carbines. In Arabia, a dagger. Tell your client that, though I am the injured party, to keep my eccentricity to the very end, I shall let him have the choice of weapons, and will accept any, without discussion or argument. Any, do you understand? Even a duel by drawing lots, which is always stupid. But with me, it is a different matter. I am sure of winning." "Sure of winning?" Beauchamp repeated, looking at the Count with alarm. "Yes, indeed," said Monte Cristo, lightly shrugging his shoulders. "Otherwise I should not fight Monsieur de Morcerf. I shall kill him. I must do it, and so it will be. Simply send round to my house this evening to tell me the weapon and the place. I do not like to be kept waiting." "Pistols, 8 in the morning, in the Bois de Visson," said Beauchamp, somewhat put out, not knowing whether he was dealing with an impudent braggart or a supernatural being. "Perfect, monsieur," said Monte Cristo. "And now that we have settled that, I beg you, let me watch the performance, and ask your friend Albert not to come back this evening. He would do himself no good with all his ill-mannered aggression. Tell him to go home and get some sleep." Beauchamp left in astonishment. "And now," Monte Cristo said, turning to Morrel, "I can call on you, can't I?" "Certainly, Count. I am at your disposal. Yet—" "What?" "It is important for me to know the true cause. Does this mean that you are refusing me?" "Not at all." "The cause, Monsieur Morrel?" said the Count. "The young man himself is going forward blindly, without realizing it. The true cause is known only to myself and to God, but I give you my word of honour that God, who does know it, will be on our side." "That is enough, Count," said Morrel. "Who is your other second?" "I know no one in Paris whom I would wish to honour in that way apart from yourself, Morrel, and your brother-in-law, Emmanuel. Do you think he would perform this service for me?" "I can answer for him as for myself, Count." "Good. That's all I need. Tomorrow at 7 o'clock at my house, then? We shall be there. Hush, the curtain is rising. Listen, I never miss a note of this opera. It's such wonderful music, William Tell. Chapter 89. Night. Monte Cristo waited, as he usually did, until Dupré had sung his famous Suivez-moi, and only then did he get up and leave. Morel left him at the door, repeating his promise to be at the Count's with Emmanuel the next morning at exactly 7 o'clock. Then the Count got into his coupe, still calm and smiling. 5 minutes later he was home. But one would have not to know the man to mistake the tone in which he said to Ali as he came in, "Ali, my ivory-handled pistols." Ali brought his master the box, and the Count started to examine the weapons with the natural concern of a man who is about to entrust his life to some scraps of lead and metal. These were private weapons that Monte Cristo had made for target practice in his apartments. A percussion cap was enough to fire the bullet, and from the adjoining room no one could doubt that the Count, as they say on the firing ranges, was engaged in getting his eye in. He was just fitting the weapon in his hand and looking for the bull on a small metal plaque that served him as a target, when the door of his study opened and Baptistin came in. But even before he had opened his mouth, the Count noticed through the still open door a veiled woman standing in the half-light of the next room. She had followed Baptistin. She saw the Count with a pistol in his hand. She had seen 2 swords on the table, and she ran forward. Baptistin looked inquiringly at his master. The Count gestured to dismiss him, and Baptistin left, closing the door behind him. "Who are you, madame?" the Count asked the veiled woman. The stranger looked all around her to make sure that she was quite alone then. Bending forward as if she wanted to kneel down, and clasping her hands, she said in a desperate voice, "Edmund, you must not kill my son." The Count took 1 pace backwards, gave a faint cry, and dropped the pistol he was holding. What name did you say, Madame de Morcerf?" he asked. "Yours," she cried, throwing back her veil. "Yours, which perhaps I alone have not forgotten. Edmund, it is not Madame de Morcerf who has come to you. It is Mercedes." "Mercedes is dead, madame," said Monte Cristo. "I do not know anyone of that name." "Mercedes is alive, monsieur, and Mercedes remembers, for she alone recognized you when she saw you, and even without seeing you, by your voice, Edmund, by the mere sound of your voice. Since that time she has followed you step by step. She has watched you and been wary of you, because she did not need to wonder whose was the hand that has struck down Monsieur de Morcerf." "Fernand, you mean, madame?" Monte Cristo said, with bitter irony in his voice. "Since we are remembering one another's names, let's remember all of them." Monte Cristo had spoken Fernand's name with such hatred that Mercedes felt a shudder of fear run through her whole body. "You see, Edmund, I was not mistaken," she cried. "I was right to say to you, 'Spare my son.'" "Who ever told you, madame, that I had any quarrel with your son?" "No one. A mother has second sight. I guessed everything. I followed him to the opera this evening, and from the ground floor box where I was hiding, I saw everything." "If you saw everything, madame, then you will have seen that Fernand's son insulted me publicly," Monte Cristo said with dreadful impassivity. "Oh, have pity!" "You saw," he went on, "that he would have thrown his glove in my face if one of my friends, Monsieur Morel, had not stayed his arm. Listen to me. My son also guessed what is going on and attributes his father's misfortunes to you." "You are confused, madame," Monte Cristo said. "These are not misfortunes. They are a punishment. I am not the one who has struck Monsieur de Morcerf. Providence is punishing him." "So why do you take the place of Providence?" Mercedes cried. "Why do you remember when it has forgotten? What do they matter to you, Edmund, Janina and its vizier? What wrong did Fernand Mondego do to you by betraying Ali Temelin?" "So, madame," Monte Cristo replied, "all this is an affair between the Frankish captain and Vasiliki's daughter. You are right. It does not concern me, and if I have sworn to take my revenge, it is not on the Frankish captain or on the Count of Morcerf, but on the fisherman Fernand, husband of Mercedes the Catalan." "Oh, monsieur," the Countess exclaimed, "what a dreadful revenge for a sin which fate drove me to commit! Because I am the guilty party, Edmund. If you must take revenge on anyone, let it be on me, because I did not have the strength to withstand your absence and my loneliness." "And why was I absent? Why were you all alone?" Monte Cristo cried. "Because you were arrested, Edmund, and taken prisoner." "Why was I arrested? Why was I imprisoned?" "I don't know," said Mercedes. "Yes, you do not know, madame, or at least I hope you do not. Well, I will tell you. I was arrested and imprisoned because in the café of La Réserve, the very day before I was due to marry you, a man called Danglars wrote this letter which the fisherman Fernand personally took it upon himself to post." And, going to his bureau, Monte Cristo took out a faded piece of paper, written on in ink the colour of rust, which he handed to Mercedes. It was the letter from Danglars to the Crown Prosecutor, which the Count of Monte Cristo had removed from the dossier of Edmond Dantès on the day when, disguised as an agent of the House of Thomson and French, he had paid the 200,000 francs to Monsieur de Beauville. Appalled, Mercedes read the following lines. "The Crown Prosecutor is advised by a friend of the monarchy and the faith that one Edmond Dantès, first mate of the Pharaon, arriving this morning from Smyrna after putting in at Naples and Portoferrajo, was entrusted by Murat with a letter for the usurper, and by the usurper with a letter to the Bonapartist committee in Paris. Proof of his guilt will be found when he is arrested, since the letter will be discovered either on his person or at the house of his father, or in his cabin on board the Pharaon." "Oh, God," said Mercedes, wiping the sweat from her forehead. "And this letter—" "It cost me 200,000 francs to obtain it, madame," said Monte Cristo. "But it was cheap at the price, since it has allowed me today to exonerate myself in your sight." "What was the outcome of this letter?" "That, as you know, was my arrest. What you do not know is how long my imprisonment lasted. What you do not know is that I stayed for 14 years, a quarter of a league away from you, in a dungeon in the Château d'If. What you do not know is that every day during those 14 years I repeated the vow of revenge that I made on the first day, even though I did not know that you had married Fernand, the man who denounced me, and that my father was dead, starved to death." "By God's law!" Mercedes exclaimed, staggering. "That I learned when I left prison, 14 years after I went in. And that is why I swore, on the living Mercedes and on my dead father, to be avenged on Fernand. And I am avenged." "Are you sure that the unhappy Fernand did this?" "By my soul, madame, and in the way I told you. In any case, it is not much more disgraceful than having gone over to the English when he was a Frenchman by adoption, having fought against the Spaniards when he was one by birth, having betrayed and killed Ali when he was in Ali's pay. What was the letter that you have just read compared with such things? An amorous ploy which, I confess and can understand, might be forgiven by the woman who married the man, but which cannot be forgiven by the lover who was to marry her. Well now, the French have not had vengeance on the traitor, The Spaniards did not shoot the traitor, and Ali, lying in his tomb, left the traitor unpunished. But I, who have also been betrayed, assassinated, and cast into a tomb, I have emerged from that tomb by the grace of God, and I owe it to God to take my revenge. He has sent me for that purpose. Here I am." The poor woman let her head fall into her hands. Her legs gave way beneath her, and she fell to her knees. "Forgive, Edmund," she said. "For my sake, forgive, for I love you still." The dignity of the wife reined back the impulse of the lover and the mother. Her forehead was bent nearly to the carpet. The Count ran over to her and raised her up. Then, seated on a chair, through her tears, she was able to look at Monte Cristo's masculine features, still imprinted by sorrow and hatred, with a threatening look. "Not crush this accursed race?" he muttered. "Disobey God who roused me up to punish it? Impossible, madame, impossible." "Edmund," the poor mother said, trying everything in her power. "My God, when I call you Edmund, why do you not call me Mercedes?" "Mercedes," Monte Cristo repeated. "Mercedes. Ah, yes, you are right. This name is still sweet to me when I speak it. And this is the first time for many years that it has sounded so clear as it left my lips. Oh, Mercedes, I have spoken your name with sighs of melancholy, with groans of pain, and with a croak of despair. I have spoken it frozen with cold, huddled on the straw of my dungeon. I have spoken it raging with heat and rolling around on the stone floor of my prison. Mercedes, I must have my revenge, because for 14 years I suffered, 14 years I wept and cursed. Now I say to you, Mercedes, I must have my revenge." And, fearful that he might give way to the prayers of the woman whom he had loved so much, the Count summoned up his memories in the service of his hatred. "Take your revenge, Edmund," the poor woman said, "but take it on those who are guilty. Be avenged on him, on me, but not on my son. It is written in the holy book that the sins of the fathers shall be visited upon the children, even unto the 3rd and 4th generation," Monte Cristo replied. "Since God dictated those very words to his prophet, why should I be better than God?" And he gave a sigh that was like a roar, and clasped his fine hair in his hands. "Edmund," Mercedes went on, holding out her hands to him, "as long as I have known you, I have worshipped your name and respected your memory. My friend, do not ask me to tarnish that noble and pure image which is constantly reflected in the mirror of my heart. Edmund, if you knew all the prayers that I have offered up to God on your behalf, as long as I hoped you were still living, and since I believed you were dead, yes, alas, dead, I thought that your corpse was buried beneath some dark tower, or cast into one of those depths into which jailers throw the bodies of dead prisoners, and I wept. But what could I do for you, Edmund, except pray or weep? Listen to me. Every night for 10 years I had the same dream. They said that you had tried to escape, that you had taken the place of another prisoner, that you had climbed into a dead man's shroud, and that they had flung the living corpse from the top to the bottom of the Château d'If, and that only the cry which you gave on crashing against the rocks revealed the substitution to your burial party, who had become your executioners. Well, Edmund, I swear on the head of the son on whose behalf I now beseech you, Edmund, for 10 years every night I saw men throwing something shapeless and nameless from the top of a rock, and for every night for 10 years I heard a dreadful cry that woke me up, shivering and icy cold. Oh, believe me, Edmund, I, too, wrongdoer though I was, I too have suffered. Did you experience your father's death in your absence? Did you see the woman you loved hold out her hand to your rival while you were croaking in the depths of the abyss? Monte Cristo plunged his hands deeper into his hair. No, Mercedes said, interrupting him, but I have seen the man I loved preparing to become the murderer of my son. She said these words with such overwhelming grief, in such a desperate voice, that when he heard it, a sob rose in the Count's throat. The lion was tamed, the avenging angel overcome. What do you want? He said. Your son's life? Well then, he shall live. Mercedes gave a cry that brought 2 tears to Monte Cristo's eyes, but these 2 tears disappeared almost immediately, God doubtless having sent some angel to gather them as being more precious in his eyes than the richest pearls of Gujarat or Ophir. She clasped the Count's hand and raised it to her lips. "Oh, Edmund," she cried, "thank you, thank you. You are as I have never ceased to think of you, and as I have never ceased to love you. Oh, now I can say it." "So much the better," Monte Cristo replied, "that poor Edmund will not have long to be loved by you. The corpse is about to return to its tomb, and the ghost into the darkness." "What are you saying, Edmund?" "I am saying that, since you command me to do so, Mercedes, I must die." "Die? Who ever said such a thing? Who speaks of dying? Where did you get such ideas?" "Surely you don't imagine that, having been publicly insulted in front of a theatre full of people, in the presence of your friends and those of your son, provoked by a child who will boast of my forgiveness as a victory, you do not imagine, I say, that I have any desire to live for a moment longer. What I have loved most after you, Mercedes, is myself, that is to say, my dignity, that is to say, the strength that made me superior to other men. That strength was my life. You have shattered it with a word. I die." "But the duel will not take place, Edmund, since you have forgiven him." "It shall take place, madame," Monte Cristo said solemnly. "But my blood will slake the earth instead of your son's." Mercedes gave a great cry and rose to her feet. Then suddenly she stopped. "Edmund," she said, "there is a God above us, since you are alive and I have seen you again, and I trust in him in the very depths of my heart. In expectation of his aid, I shall rely on your word. You said that my son will live. This is true, isn't it?" "Yes, he shall, madame," Monte Cristo said, astonished that, without any further exclamation or other sign of surprise, Mercedes had accepted the heroic sacrifice he was making for her. She offered him her hand. "Edmund," she said, her eyes filling with tears as she looked at the man before her, "how fine it is of you, how great what you have just done, how sublime to have had pity on a poor woman who put herself at your mercy when everything seemed to be contrary to her hopes. Alas, I have been aged more by sorrow than by the years, and I can no longer recall to my Edmund's memory, even by a look or a smile, that Mercedes whom he once gazed on for so many hours on end. Believe me, Edmund, I told you that I too have suffered much. I repeat, it is dreary indeed to see one's life pass without recalling a single joy or retaining a single hope. But this proves that all is not finished on this earth. No, all is not finished. I feel it from what still remains in my heart. Oh, Edmund, I say again, it is fine, it is great, it is sublime to forgive as you have just done." "You say that, Mercedes. What would you say if you knew the extent of the sacrifice I am making for you? Suppose that the Lord God, after creating the world, after fertilizing the void, had stopped 1/3 of the way through his creation to spare an angel the tears that our crimes would one day bring to his immortal eyes. Suppose that, having prepared everything, needed everything, seeded everything, at the moment when he was about to admire his work, God had extinguished the sun, and with his foot dashed the world into eternal night. Then you will have some idea. Or, rather, no, even then you cannot have any idea of what I am losing by losing my life at this moment. Mercedes looked at the Count with an expression that showed her combined astonishment, admiration, and gratitude. Monte Cristo put his head into his burning hands, as if no longer able to support the weight of his thoughts. "Edmund," said Mercedes, "I have only one more word to say to you." The Count gave a bitter smile. "Edmund," she went on, "you will see that even though my brow has paled, my eyes have lost their sparkle, my beauty is gone, and, in short, Mercedes no longer looks like herself as far as her face is concerned, you will see that her heart is still the same. Farewell, then, Edmund. I have nothing further to ask of God. I have rediscovered you as noble and as great as ever. Adieu, Edmund. Thank you, and farewell." The Count did not reply. Mercedes opened the door of the study, and had vanished before he emerged from the deep and painful reverie into which his lost vengeance had plunged him. 1 o'clock was striking on the clock on the Invalides, when the carriage bearing away Madame de Morcerf, as it rolled across the paving stones of the Champs-Élysées, made Monte Cristo look up. "Senseless," he said, "the day when I resolved to take my revenge. Senseless not to have torn out my heart."
And that brings us to the end of the first half of, for those who showed up after the start, Lucy's recorded reading of The Count of Monte Cristo. Sorry, point the mic back to my face. Yeah, so I'm going to send you all to a break now. I mean, well, I'll again explain. You probably figured it out already because you're smart people, but yes, for those showed up after the start, Lucy recorded this reading for me to play the other day because she was unable to be here this evening. She is busy. And so yeah, we thought it would still be good to go on with Monte Cristo, and frankly I'm glad for it because I would not want to be sitting reading in this heat. But yeah, gonna send you to a break, and we'll see you on the other side. Goodbye for now. after the break. I hope that you used that time. Really, that was 5 minutes, because that just vanished. I didn't even use it to go downstairs and get some more water, but I should do that once I start the next recording. But yeah, I hope you use the time wisely to, like, get drinks and do stuff that you need to do, whatever that may be, and are ready for the second half. But firstly, since my brain is currently just a dry, cracked riverbed of zero information retention, I don't remember whether I said thanks in chat, but I shall say thanks aloud as well to Molifant and Sil, both for the resubs. Extremely kind of you both. Very much appreciated. And lovely to see you. Well, yeah, Molifant sub, resub, I don't know. It just says subscribe with Prime. But thank you all the same. It is, I do not wish to encourage repeat subscriptions. We are grateful for whatever is given. And yeah, hope everyone's well. Hope you're all having a good whatever time of day it is for you, and if you are dealing with the oppressive, overbearing heat, that you're able to escape it some way. We currently have the windows open. It's sort of nice, if not very breezy. But yeah, I'm going to send us into the second half of this. Once again, Zeva, let me know if the volume need fixing and whatnot. I don't get the full experience that you do. So I don't know exactly how the levels are all coming through, but yeah, let me know if anything needs tweaking once we start. As we throw to the second half of the Count of Monte Cristo.
90. The Encounter. After the departure of Mercedes, everything in Monte Cristo's house lapsed into darkness. Around him and within him his thoughts ceased, and his energetic mind slumbered as the body does after a supreme effort. What? He thought, while the lamp and the candles burned sadly away and the servants waited impatiently in the antechamber. What? The structure that was so long in building, which demanded so much anxious toil, has been demolished at a single blow, a single word, a breath of air. What, this I that I thought was something, this I of which I was proud, this I that I saw so small in the dungeons of the Château d'If and managed to make so great, will be, tomorrow, a speck of dust. Alas, it is not the death of the body that I mourn. It is not that destruction of the vital spark, the point of rest towards which everything tends, for which every unfortunate yearns, that material calm which I have so long sighed for, and towards which I was proceeding by the painful road of hunger when Faria appeared in my cell. What is death? One step further into calm, and two, perhaps, into silence. No, it is not life that I regret, but the ruin of my plans, which were so long in devising and so laborious to construct. Providence, which I thought favoured them, was apparently against them. God did not want them to come to fruition. This burden which I took on, almost as heavy as a world, and which I thought I could carry to the end, was measured according to my desire and not my strength. I shall have to put it down when my task is barely half completed. I shall have to become a fatalist after 14 years of despair and 10 years of hope had made me a believer in Providence. And all this, good Lord, because my heart, which I thought was dead, was only numbed, because it awoke. It beat, because I gave way to the pain of that beating which had been aroused in my breast by the voice of a woman. And yet, the Count went on, lapsing more and more into anticipation of the dreadful future that Mercedes had made him accept. And yet it is impossible that that woman, with such a noble heart, could for purely selfish reasons have agreed to let me be killed when I am so full of life and strength. It is not possible that she should take her maternal love, or rather her maternal delirium, that far. Some virtues, when taken to the extreme, become crimes. No. She will have imagined some touching scene in which she will come and throw herself between our swords, and what was sublime here will become ridiculous in the field. And a blush of pride rose to his cheeks. Ridiculous, he repeated, and the ridicule rebound on me. I, ridiculous? Never. I would rather die. And by exaggerating in advance the worst possible outcome on the morrow, which he had called down on himself by promising Mercedes to let her son live, the Count eventually told himself, folly, 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 to place oneself as a sitting target in front of that young man's pistol. He will never believe that my death is suicide, and yet it is important for the honour of my memory. This is not vanity, is it, God? Rightful pride, nothing more. It is important for the honour of my memory that the world knows that I myself agreed, of my own will, by my own free choice, to stay my arm when it was raised to strike, and that I struck myself down with that hand so powerfully protected against others. I shall do it. I must. And, grasping a pen, he took a sheet of paper from the secret drawer in his bureau, and at the bottom of this sheet, which was the will that he had drawn up on arriving in Paris, added a sort of codicil that would make his death clear to the least perceptive reader. I am doing this, God, as much for your honour as for mine, he said, raising his eyes to heaven. For the past 10 years I have considered myself as the emissary of your vengeance, God, and apart from this Morcerf, there are other wretches, Danglars, Villefort, who must not imagine that chance has rid them of their enemy, and nor should Morcerf himself. On the contrary, let them know that Providence, which had already pronounced sentence on them, has been revised by the sole power of my will, that the punishment that awaited them in this world now awaits them in the next, and that they have merely exchanged time for eternity. While he was hovering amid these uncertainties, the nightmare of a man kept awake by pain, daylight began to whiten the window panes and shed its light on the pale blue paper under his hands, on which he had just written this supreme justification of Providence. It was 5 o'clock. Suddenly, a faint sound reached his ears. Monte Cristo thought he had heard something like a muffled sigh. He turned around, looked about him, and saw no one, but the noise was repeated so clearly that doubt became certainty. He got up and quietly opened the drawing-room door. On a chair, her arms hanging over the sides and her beautiful pale head leaning back, he saw Haydée, who had placed herself in front of the door so that he could not leave without seeing her. But sleep, which is so potent to subdue youth, had surprised her after the exhaustion of the previous day. Even the sound of the door opening could not rouse her from her sleep. Monte Cristo turned on her a look full of tenderness and regret. She remembered that she had a son, he said, but I forgot I had a daughter. Then, sadly shaking his head, poor Haydée, she wanted to see me and talk to me. She must have feared or guessed something. Oh, I cannot go without saying farewell to her. I cannot die without entrusting her to someone. He returned quietly to his desk and wrote beneath the first lines, I bequeath to Maximilien Morel, captain of Spahi and son of my former master Pierre Morel, ship-owner of Marseille, the sum of 20 million francs, a part of which he will give to his sister Julie and to his brother-in-law Emmanuel, provided he does not think that this excess of wealth might threaten their happiness. These 20 millions are buried in my caves on Monte Cristo, the secret of which is known to Bertuccio. If his heart is free and he wishes to marry Haydée, daughter of Ali Pasha of Janina, whom I have brought up with the love of a father and who has shown the affection of a daughter towards me, then he will carry out, if not the last impulse of my will, at least the last desire of my heart. The present will has already appointed Haydée heiress to the rest of my fortune, consisting of lands, liquid assets in England, Austria and Holland, and movable property in my different palaces and houses, and which, after these 20 millions have been subtracted, should still amount to 60 million francs. He had just finished writing this last line when a cry behind him made the pen fall from his hand. "Haydée," he said, "did you read it?" The young woman, awakened by the daylight falling on her eyelids, had got up and come in to the Count without him hearing her light steps, muffled by the carpet. "Oh, my lord," she said, clasping her hands, "why are you writing at such an hour? Why are you bequeathing me all your fortune, my lord? Are you leaving me?" "I am going on a journey, my angel," Monte Cristo said, with an expression of infinite melancholy and tenderness. "And if some misfortune should befall me—" He paused. "Well?" the young woman asked in an authoritative voice that the Count had not heard before. It made him shudder. "Well, if some misfortune should befall me," he continued, "I want my girl to be happy." Haydée smiled sadly and shook her head. "Are you thinking about death, my lord?" she asked. "It's a salutary thought, my child, the sages say." "Well, then, if you die," she said, "leave your wealth to someone else, because, if you die, I shall no longer need anything." Taking the paper, she tore it into 4 parts, which she scattered in the middle of the room. After that, exhausted by this expenditure of energy, so unusual for a slave girl, she fell to the ground, not asleep this time, but in a faint. Monte Cristo bent over her and lifted her in his arms, seeing her pale complexion, her lovely closed eyes, this beautiful body, senseless as though in abandon. For the first time it occurred to him that she might perhaps love him in some way other than that in which a daughter loves her father. "Alas," he murmured, with profound despondency, "so I might yet have been happy." He carried Haydée into her apartments, entrusted her, still senseless, to the care of her women, and returning to his study, and this time locking the door behind him, he recopied the torn will. Just as he was coming to the end, he heard the noise of a cab driving into the courtyard. He went over to the window and saw Maximilien and Emmanuel getting out. "Good, about time," he said, and he sealed his will with 3 seals. A moment later he heard the sound of footsteps in the drawing-room and went to open the study door himself. Morel appeared on the threshold. It was 20 minutes before the appointed time. "I may be early, Count," he said, "but I admit frankly that I have been unable to sleep for a minute, and the same was true of everyone in our house. I needed to see you, strengthened by your courage and confidence, to recover myself." Monte Cristo could not let this proof of affection go unacknowledged, and it was not his hand but both arms that he opened to greet him, saying, in a voice full of emotion, "Morel, it is a fine day for me when I feel myself to have gained the affection of a man such as you. Good morning, Monsieur Emmanuel. So, Maximilien, are you coming with me?" "By heaven," said the young captain, "did you ever doubt it?" "But suppose I were in the wrong? Listen, I watched you yesterday throughout that incident when you were provoked, and all last night I was thinking of your self-confidence. I decided that justice must be on your side, or else one can no longer trust in the look on a man's face. Yet Albert is your friend, Morel. A mere acquaintance, Count. Did you meet him for the first time on the day we met? Yes, that's right. Well then, you see, you had to remind me before I remembered it. Thank you, Morel." Then, striking the bell, he said, when Ali at once answered the call, "Take this to my notary. It is my will, Morel. When I am dead, please go and consult it." What do you mean?" said Morel. "When you are dead?" Oh, one must prepare for any eventuality, dear friend. But what did you do yesterday after you left me? I went to Tortoni's, where, as I expected, I found Beauchamp and Château-Renard. I must admit I was looking for them. Why, since everything was settled? Come, Count, this matter is serious, unavoidable. Did you ever doubt that? No. The insult was public, and everyone was already talking about it. So? So I hoped to have a change of weapons and substitute swords for pistols. Pistols are blind. Did you succeed? Monte Cristo asked, with an imperceptible glimmer of hope. No, because they know your skill with the sword. Pah! Who gave my secret away? The fencing masters who were worsted by you. So you failed? They refused outright. Morel, the Count said, have you ever seen me fire a pistol? No, never. Well, we have time. Watch. Monte Cristo took the pistols that he had been holding when Mercedes came in, and, sticking an ace of clubs on the board, he shot off each of the 4 points of the club. Morel went paler with every shot. He examined the bullets with which Monte Cristo had achieved this tour de force, and saw that they were no larger than buckshot. "It's terrifying," he said. "Look, Emmanuel." Then, turning back to Monte Cristo, he said, "Count, in heaven's name, don't kill Albert. The wretch has a mother." "Indeed he has," said Monte Cristo, "and I have none." Morel shuddered at the voice in which these words were spoken. "You are the injured party, Count." "Certainly. What does that mean?" "It means that you will fire first." "I will?" "Oh, yes. That much I did manage to obtain. Or rather, I insisted on it. We are making enough concessions to them. They had to agree to that." "From how many paces?" 20. A terrible smile passed over the Count's lips. "Morel," he said, "don't forget what you have just seen." "So I am counting on your human feelings to save Albert," the young man said. "My feelings?" said the Count. "On your generosity, my friend. Since you are so sure of hitting your mark, I can say something to you that would be ridiculous if I said it to anyone else." "Which is?" "Break his arm. Wound him, but don't kill him." "Now listen to this, Morel," said the Count. "I need no encouragement to deal gently with Monsieur de Morcerf. Indeed, Monsieur de Morcerf, I can tell you now, will be treated so kindly that he will go home quietly with his 2 friends, while I—" "You will what?" "That's another matter. I shall be brought back." "Come, come," cried Maximilien, beside himself. "It's as I am telling you, my dear Morel. Monsieur de Morcerf will kill me." Morel looked at the Count like a man who no longer understands what is being said. "What has happened to you since yesterday evening, Count?" "What happened to Brutus on the eve of the Battle of Philippi? I have seen a ghost." "And this ghost?" "This ghost, Morel, told me that I had lived long enough." They exchanged looks. Monte Cristo took out his watch. "Let's go," he said. "It is 5 to 7, and the appointment is for exactly 8 o'clock." A carriage was waiting, ready harnessed. Monte Cristo got into it with his 2 seconds. Crossing the corridor, he paused to listen by a door. Maximilien and Emmanuel, who had tactfully carried on for a few steps, thought they heard a sigh answering a sob. As the clock struck 8, they arrived at the meeting place. "Here we are," said Morel, putting his head out of the window. "We are the first." "The gentleman will excuse me," said Baptistin, who had accompanied his master in a state of unspeakable terror, "but I believe I can see a carriage over there under the trees." "So there is," said Emmanuel. "I can see two young men walking together. They seem to be waiting." Monte Cristo jumped lightly down from his barouche and offered Emmanuel and Maximilien his hand so that they could follow. Maximilien kept the Count's hand in his. "That's better," he said. "There's the sort of hand I like to see on a man whose life depends on the rightness of his cause." Unobtrusively, Monte Cristo held Morel back a few paces behind his brother-in-law. "Maximilien," he said, "is your heart pledged to anyone?" Morel looked at him with astonishment. "I'm not asking you to confide any secrets in me, my good fellow. It's a simple question, and all I ask is that you should answer yes or no." "I am in love with a young woman, Count." "Very much in love?" "More than life itself." "Ah, well," said Monte Cristo, "that's another hope gone." Then he added under his breath with a sigh, "Poor Haydée." "I must say, Count, if I didn't know you so well, I should think you less resolute than you are," said Morel. "Because I am sighing at the thought of someone I must leave behind? Now, Morel, does a soldier know so little about courage? Do I mind losing my life? What can it mean to live or die to me, who has spent 20 years hovering between life and death? In any case, have no fear, Morel. Even if this were a weakness, it would be for your eyes alone. I know that the world is a drawing-room from which one must retire politely and honourably, that is to say, with a bow, after paying one's gaming debts." "That's better," said Morel. "Now you're talking. By the way, have you brought your weapons?" "Why should I? I hope that these gentlemen will have theirs." "I shall find out," said Morel. "Yes, but no negotiation, you understand?" "Oh, rest assured of that." Morel crossed over to Beauchamp and Château Renard. The latter, seeing Maximilien coming, advanced to meet him. The three young men greeted one another, if not with warmth, at least politely. "I beg your pardon, gentlemen," said Morel. "I don't see Monsieur de Morcerf." "He sent a message to us this morning," Château Renard replied, "saying that he would join us here." "Ah," said Morel. Beauchamp took out his watch. 8:05. No time has been lost, Monsieur Morel," he said. "That was not why I remarked on it," Maximilien replied. "In any event," said Château Renard, interrupting, "here is a carriage." The carriage was proceeding at a full trot down one of the avenues leading to the crossroads at which they were standing. "Gentlemen," said Morel, "you have doubtless brought some pistols with you. Monsieur de Monte Cristo has said he is ready to waive his right to use his own weapons." "We anticipated this courteous gesture by the Count," Beauchamp replied. "I have bought some pistols which I purchased a week or 10 days ago, thinking I might need them for an affair such as this one. They are entirely new and have never been fired. Would you like to inspect them?" "Oh, Monsieur Beauchamp," said Morel, bowing, "since you assure me that Monsieur de Morcerf is unacquainted with these weapons, I suppose you must realize that your word is enough." "Gentlemen," said Château Renard, "it was not after all Morcerf whom we saw arriving in that carriage. It was, believe it or not, Franz and Debray." As he said it, the two young men in question were coming over to them. "You here, gentlemen," Château Renard said, shaking hands with each of them. "What brings you?" "Albert does," said Debray. "He sent us a message this morning for us to be here." Beauchamp and Château Renard looked at each other in astonishment. "Gentlemen," said Morel, "I may have the answer." "Tell us." "Yesterday afternoon I received a letter from Monsieur de Morcerf asking me to be at the opera." "So did I," said Debray. "So did I," said Franz. And so did we, said Château-Renard and Beauchamp. He wanted you to be present at the provocation, said Morel. Now he wants you to be present at the duel. Ah, yes, the young man said. That must be it, Monsieur Maximilien. You are quite probably right. But in spite of all that, Château-Renard muttered, Albert hasn't arrived. He's 10 minutes late. Here he is, said Beauchamp. Look, on horseback. He's galloping along with his servant behind him. How rash and foolish of him, Château-Renard said, to come on horseback when he is going to fire a pistol. I thought I had trained him better than that. Just look, said Beauchamp. He's wearing a collar, his coat open, a white waistcoat. Why didn't he draw a target on his stomach? It would have been quicker and easier altogether. While they were talking, Albert had come within 10 yards of the group. He pulled up his horse, jumped down and threw the reins to his servant. Then he began to walk over to them. He was pale, his eyes red and swollen. It was clear that he had not slept a wink the whole night. His whole face was imprinted with an air of grave sadness that was uncommon in him. "Thank you, gentlemen," he said, "for being so kind as to accept my invitation. Believe me, I am most grateful for this mark of friendship." As Morcerf approached, Morel had stepped back some 10 yards and was standing apart from the rest. "And also to you, Monsieur Morel," said Albert. "I owe you my thanks. Please come over, you are welcome here." "Monsieur," said Maximilien, "perhaps you are not aware that I am here as a second to the Count of Monte Cristo." "I was not sure of it, but I suspected as much." "So much the better. The more honourable men there are here, the happier I shall be." "Monsieur Morel," said Château-Renard, "you can tell Monsieur de Monte Cristo that Monsieur de Morcerf has arrived, and that we are at his disposal." Morel was on the point of fulfilling his mission, while Beauchamp fetched the box of pistols from the carriage. "Wait, gentlemen," said Albert. "I have something to say to the Count of Monte Cristo." "In private?" asked Morel. "No, monsieur. In front of everyone." Albert's seconds looked at each other in surprise. France and Debray whispered a few words to one another, and Morel, delighted by this unexpected occurrence, went to find the Count, who was walking along a side path with Emmanuel. "What does he want with me?" he asked. "I don't know, but he wishes to speak to you." "I hope to heaven that he will not tempt fate with some new insult." "I don't believe that is his intention." The Count came over with Maximilien and Emmanuel. His face, entirely calm and serene, contrasted strangely with the shattered features of Albert, who also advanced from his side with the other 4 young men following. When they were 3 yards from one another, Albert and the Count stopped. "Gentlemen," said Albert, "please come closer. I should not like you to miss a word of what I am about to have the honour to say to Monsieur le Comte de Monte Cristo, because I want you, who will hear it, to repeat what I shall say, however odd my speech may sound to you." "I am waiting, monsieur," said the Count. "Monsieur," said Albert, in a voice that was unsteady at first, but which became more confident as he went on, "I reproached you for having divulged the conduct of Monsieur de Morcerf in Epirus, because, however guilty the Count of Morcerf might have been, I did not think you had the right to punish him. Now, monsieur, I realize that you do have that right. It is not Fernand Mondego's treachery towards Ali Pasha that makes me so willing to forgive you. It is the treachery of the fisherman Fernand towards you, and the unimaginable misfortunes that followed on that treachery. So I say, and I proclaim it aloud, yes, monsieur, you were right to take your revenge on my father. And I, his son, thank you for not having done more." If a thunderbolt had fallen among the witnesses to this unexpected scene, It could not have left them more astonished than they were by Albert's statement. As for Monte Cristo, his eyes had slowly been raised to the heavens with an expression of infinite gratitude, and he was full of admiration for the way in which Albert's fiery temperament, and he had had ample opportunity to observe his courage when faced by the Roman bandits, had immediately bowed to this sudden humiliation. In this he saw the influence of Mercedes, and understood now why her noble heart had not tried to prevent him from making a sacrifice which she knew in advance would be unnecessary. "Now, monsieur," said Albert, "if you consider that the excuses I have just made are sufficient, I beg you to give me your hand. After the most rare virtue of infallibility, which you seem to possess, the greatest virtue of all, in my opinion, is to be able to admit when one is wrong. But this confession only concerns me. I acted properly in the eyes of men, but you did so in the eyes of God. Only an angel could save one of us from death, and that angel came down from heaven, if not to make us friends, alas, fate has made that impossible, at least two men who respect one another." Monte Cristo, with damp eyes, his chest heaving and his mouth half open, offered Albert a hand which the latter grasped and pressed with a feeling that was akin to awestruck terror. "Gentlemen," he said, "Monsieur de Monte Cristo has been good enough to forgive me. I acted hastily towards him. Haste is a poor counsellor. I acted wrongly. Now my fault is repaired. I hope that the world will not consider me a coward because I have done what my conscience ordered me to do. But in any case, if people were to be mistaken about me," the young man said, raising his head proudly, and as if throwing down the gauntlet to his friends and enemies, "I should try to correct their opinions." "What can have happened last night?" Beauchamp asked Chateau Renard. "It seems to me that we have had a sorry part to play here." "Indeed, what Albert has just done is either quite wretched or very noble," the Baron answered. "Come now, tell me," Debray asked Franz, "what does all this mean? What, the Count of Monte Cristo dishonours Monsieur de Morcerf, and the man's son thinks he's in the right? Well, if I had 10 Janinas in my family, I should consider myself under only one obligation, and that would be to fight 10 duels." As for Monte Cristo, with his head bent and his arms hanging by his side, weighed down under 24 years of memory, he was not thinking of Albert, or Beauchamp, or Chateau Renard, or any of those around him. He was thinking about that courageous woman who had come to him to beg for her son's life, and to whom he had offered his own, and who had just saved him by the awful confession of a family secret which might have killed forever in this young man the feeling of filial piety. "Once more, Providence," he muttered. "Ah, only now, from this day onwards, am I really certain of being the emissary of God." Chapter 91. Mother and Son. With a smile full of melancholy and dignity, the Count of Monte Cristo bowed in farewell to the 5 young men, then got back into his carriage with Maximilien and Emmanuel. Albert, Beauchamp, and Chateau Renard remained alone on the field of battle. The young man gave his 2 seconds a look that, without being timid, seemed to be asking for their opinion on what had just taken place. Either because he was the more sensitive or less hypocritical, Beauchamp was the first to speak. "Well, well, my dear friend," he said, "let me congratulate you. This is an unexpected conclusion to a very unpleasant affair." Albert remained deep in thought and said nothing. Chateau Renard just tapped his boot with his cane. "Are we going, then?" he asked, after an embarrassing silence. "Whenever you wish," Beauchamp replied. "Just give me time to congratulate Monsieur de Morcerf. He has today demonstrated such chivalrous and such rare generosity." "Ah, yes," said Chateau Renard. It is quite splendid, Beauchamp went on, to be able to keep such mastery over oneself. Yes, indeed it is, Chateaurenard said, with a highly significant chill in his voice. I, for my part, would never have managed it. Gentlemen, Albert interrupted, I don't think you have understood that something very serious happened between Monsieur de Monte Cristo and myself. Yes, I'm sure you're right, Beauchamp said at once, but not every idle young blade will be capable of understanding your heroism, and sooner or later you will find yourself having to explain it to them more forcefully than may be good for the health of your body or the length of your life. Can I give you some advice as a friend? Set off for Naples, The Hague, or St. Petersburg. These are tranquil spots whose inhabitants are more sensible about a point of honour than our hot-headed Parisians. Once you are there, get in plenty of target practice, and train yourself with an endless number of Quarte Paris and Tierce Paris. Either be well enough forgotten to come quietly back to France in a few years, or command enough respect by your gymnastic exercises to ensure your peace of mind. Aren't I right, Monsieur de Chateaurenard? My opinion entirely, the nobleman said. Nothing attracts a serious duel like an inconclusive one. Thank you, gentlemen, Albert answered with a cold smile. I shall take your advice, not because you are giving it to me, but because it was already my intention to leave France. I thank you too for the service you have done me by acting as my seconds. It is deeply engraved on my heart because, after the words that I have just heard, I can still only remember that service. Chateaurenard and Beauchamp looked at one another. The impression on both of them was the same, and the tone of voice in which Morcerf had expressed his thanks was so resolute that the position would have become awkward for all of them if the conversation had been prolonged. Adieu, Albert, Beauchamp suddenly said, casually offering the young man his hand, though it did not seem to stir the other from his lethargy. Indeed, he made no response to the proffered hand. Adieu, Chateaurenard said in turn, keeping his little cane in his left hand while giving a wave with the right. Albert's lips barely muttered adieu. His face was more explicit. It expressed a whole symphony of repressed anger, proud disdain, and generous indignation. When his 2 seconds had left in their carriage, he remained for a while in the same motionless and melancholy pose. Then, suddenly, untying the reins of his horse from the little tree around which his servant had knotted them, he leapt lightly into the saddle and galloped back towards Paris. A quarter of an hour later, he was going back into the house in the Rue de Helder. As he dismounted, he thought he saw his father's pale face looking out from behind the bedroom curtains. Albert turned his head away with a sigh and went into his little pavilion. Once inside, he cast a final glance at all the luxury that had made his life so pleasant and happy since childhood. He took one final look at the paintings whose faces seemed to smile at him and whose landscapes seemed alive with bright colours. Then he took down the portrait of his mother, removed the canvas from its oak stretcher and rolled it up, leaving the gold frame that had surrounded it black and empty. After that he put his fine Turkish swords in order, and his fine English guns, his Japanese porcelain, his mounted dishes, his artistic bronzes signed by Faucheur or Bar, went to the cupboards and put the keys in each one. He threw all the loose change that he had on him into a drawer of his bureau, leaving it open, and followed it by all the ornamental jewels which he had in goblets and boxes or on shelves. He made a precise inventory of everything, putting it at the most visible spot on a table, after removing the books and papers that were cluttering it up. As he was just starting to do this, despite Albert's order that he wanted to be left alone, his servant came into the room. "What do you want?" Morcerf asked him, in a voice more of sorrow than of anger. "I beg your pardon, monsieur," said the valet. "I do know that monsieur told me not to disturb him, but Monsieur le Comte de Morcerf has just called for me." "Well?" Albert asked. "I did not want to go to the Count's without getting my instructions from Monsieur. Why? Because the Count no doubt knows that I went with Monsieur to the field. I would imagine so, said Albert. And if he has called for me, it is most probably to question me on what happened. What should I tell him? The truth. So I shall say that the encounter did not take place? Tell him that I made my excuses to the Count of Monte Cristo. Now go. The valet bowed and left. Albert returned to his inventory. Just as he was completing it, his attention was attracted by the noise of horses' hooves in the courtyard and the wheels of a carriage rattling the windows. He went over to the window and saw his father get into his barouche and drive away. No sooner had the gate closed behind the Count than Albert went up to his mother's apartment and, since no one was there to announce him, went directly to Mercedes's room. There, his heart swelling at what he saw and what he guessed, he stopped on the threshold. As if a single soul had inhabited the two bodies, Mercedes was doing in her apartment just what Albert had been doing in his. Everything had been put in order. Lace, trimmings, jewels, linen, money, all to be carefully put away in the bottom of drawers, to which the Countess was carefully collecting the keys. Albert saw all these preparations. He knew what they meant, and crying, "Mother!" threw his arms round Mercedes's neck. The painter who could capture the expression on these two faces would surely have created a fine picture. All the material evidence of firm determination, which had not worried Albert for himself, made him deeply anxious for his mother. "What are you doing?" he asked. "And what are you doing?" she replied. "Oh, mother!" Albert cried, almost speechless with emotion. "It is not the same for you as for me. No, you cannot have come to the same decision as I have, because I am here to tell you that I am bidding farewell to your house, and to you." "So am I, Albert," Mercedes replied. "I too am leaving. But I confess, I had been counting on my sons going with me. Was I wrong?" "Mother," Albert said firmly, "I cannot make you share the fate that I intend for myself. Henceforth I must live without a name and without a fortune. So as to begin learning this hard existence, I shall have to borrow from a friend the bread that I shall eat between now and the time when I have earned more. That is why, my dearest mother, I was going to see Franz, to ask him to lend me the small sum which I have calculated I shall need." "You, my poor child," Mercedes cried. "You suffer poverty, suffer hunger. Oh, don't say that, or you will shatter all my resolutions." "But not mine, mother," Albert replied. "I am young, I am strong, I believe that I am courageous. Since yesterday I have learnt what willpower can achieve. Alas, mother, there are people who have suffered greatly, and who did not die, but raised a new fortune on the ruins of all those promises of happiness that heaven had made to them, and on all the debris of all the hopes that God had given them. I learned as much, mother. I have seen these men. I know that from the depths of the abyss into which their enemies plunged them, they have risen with such strength and glory that they have overcome their former vanquisher and cast him down in his turn. No, mother, no. From today I have broken with the past. I accept nothing of it, not even my name, because you understand... You do understand this, mother, don't you? Your son cannot bear the name of a man who ought to blush before another." "Albert, my child," said Mercedes, "if my heart had been stronger, that is the advice I should have given you. Your conscience spoke when my exhausted voice was hushed. Listen to your conscience, my son. You had friends, Albert. Break with them for the time being, but do not despair, for your mother's sake. At your age, life is still sweet, my dear Albert. You are barely 22, and since a heart as pure as yours needs a spotless name, take that of my father. He was called Herrera. I know you, Albert.
Whatever path you follow, you will soon make this name illustrious in it. So, my friend, come back to the world, made still more brilliant by your past misfortunes, and, if that is not to be, despite all my expectations, at least leave me that hope. From now on, I shall have only that thought, since I have no future, and the tomb awaits me on the threshold of this house.
I shall do everything just as you wish, mother, the young man said. Yes, I share your hope. The wrath of heaven will not pursue us, you who are so pure and I so innocent. But since we are resolved, let us act promptly. Monsieur de Morcerf left the house around half an hour ago, so as you see we have a good opportunity to avoid scandal or explanations.
I shall wait for you, my son, said Mercedes. Albert hurried onto the boulevard and brought back a cab which would pick them up outside the house. He recalled a little boarding house in the Rue de Saint-Pierre, where his mother could find simple but decent lodgings. He came back to fetch her. Just as the cab stopped in front of the door and Albert was getting down, a man came over to him and gave him a letter. Albert recognized him. It was Bertuccio. "From the Count," he said. Albert took the letter, opened it and read. After reading it, he looked around for Bertuccio, but the steward had vanished. So Albert, with tears in his eyes and a lump in his throat, went back to Mercedes and, without a word, handed her the letter. She read, "Albert, by showing you that I have guessed the plan that you are about to adopt, I hope also to show you that I understand tact. You are free. You are leaving the Count's house, and you are going to take your mother, who is as free as you are. But consider, Albert, you owe her more than you can ever repay, poor noble soul though you are. Keep the struggles for yourself, demand suffering for yourself, but spare her the first destitution that must inevitably accompany your first efforts, for she does not even deserve to partake indirectly of the misfortune that has befallen her, and Providence does not wish the innocent to pay for the guilty. I know that you are both going to leave the house in the Rue de Helder, taking nothing with you. Don't attempt to discover how I found this out. I know, that's all. So listen to me, Albert. 24 years ago I returned home to my own country, joyful and proud. I had a fiancée, Albert, a pious young woman whom I adored, and I was bringing back to my fiancée 150 louis, which I had managed to save with much difficulty through continual labour. I intended this money for her, and, knowing how treacherous the sea is, I had buried our treasure in the little garden of the house that my father inhabited in Marseille, on the Allée des Mélans. Your mother, Albert, knows that dear little house well. Recently, on my way to Paris, I came through Marseille. I went to see that house with its painful memories, and in the evening, with a spade, I probed the corner where I had buried my treasure. The iron box was still in the same place. No one had touched it. It is in the corner shaded by a fine fig tree, which my father planted on the day of my birth. Well, Albert, this money, which was once intended to secure the life and tranquillity of the woman I loved, has now, by a strange and painful twist of fate, returned to its former use. Oh, please understand how I feel. I, who could offer millions to that poor woman, and who am merely returning to her a scrap of black bread which has been hidden under my humble roof since the day when I was separated from her whom I loved. You are a generous man, Albert, but perhaps despite that you are blinded by pride or resentment. If you refuse me, if you ask someone else to do what I have the right to offer you, then I shall say that it was cruel of you to refuse the offer of life to your mother, from a man whose father was driven to starvation, despair, and death by your father. When she had finished reading, Albert remained pale and motionless, waiting for his mother to make up her mind. She looked up to heaven with an indescribable expression and said, "I accept." He has the right to pay the dowry that I shall take into a convent. And, putting the letter to her heart, she took her son's arm and walked towards the stairs, perhaps with a firmer step than even she had expected.
And that's the end of tonight's reading of the Count of Monte Cristo. Thank you